In this Tarkir Dragonstorm Draft Meta update, I'll be providing you with the most up-to-date information on the format so you can crush your next draft. First up, the format news, and our first headline is Multicolor Madness. Tarkir Dragonstorm is a set that has plentiful and powerful mana fixing. Cards like Sandstep Citadel as tri-lands at uncommon. There's a full cycle of gain lands in the set, which are tapped dual lands that gain you a life when they come into play. And these powerful mana fixers, without even counting the cards that search up lands from your deck and things like that, enable you to play powerful multicolored cards like Mammoth Bellow and Lion Weight at uncommon, and even more powerful cards at higher rarities. Because of the powerful cards that you have access to that are tons of different colors, and because the mana fixing is plentiful, you are incentivized to take high power level cards and then get the fixing to be able to play them. So normally a card like Mammoth Bellow would be hard to play unless you were playing specifically blue, green, and red. But in this format, if you're playing blue, black, and green, you can splash red to get that Mammoth Bellow into your deck if you'd like. Or similarly, if you're playing a blue, red, green deck, you can splash black to get the Lion Weight into your deck. And there's all sorts of different combinations you can play. The mana fixing is really, really strong, and the cards that you're playing with those mana fixers are also really strong. And so the incentive to go multicolor soup, to play these powerful late game strategies that touch into a lot of different colors for maybe just one or two cards in those colors is really strong. There's a large incentive to do that, and it is definitely a feasible strategy. Don't be afraid to go multicolor as long as you're prioritizing the fixing to make those powerful cards actually things that you can play. Next, it's raining bombs. There are so many powerful cards in this set at high rarities, and even though they oftentimes have what would seem to be restrictive color requirements because of the fixing we already discussed, they are definitely ones that you should just take early and then slot into your deck basically no matter what. A card like Jeskai Revelation might look like it only fits into a deck that's playing blue, red, and white. But because of the fact that there is so much fixing, you can just slot this into a deck that's just playing green, blue, and red, and then just splash white or things like that. And because the fixing is plentiful, taking these cards early is something you should do. It's something you're rewarded for doing, and the late game bombs can definitely determine a lot of games if you are playing those decks. Ugin Eye of Storms is a fantastic bomb, the best card to open pack one, pick one because it's colorless, so it fits into your deck no matter what. And then something like Roar of Endless Song is just a really killer 5-drop that you shouldn't be afraid to try and just put into your deck if you first pick it, because it's that good and you're going to be able to get the fixing to support it in a lot of cases. Next, the Mardu Menace. This is the deck that keeps these late game decks in check. Usually it is a red-white base aggressive strategy that then touches into black for a couple of finishers or more late game cards that can just help you get over the top, beat removal spells, things like that. A card like Dalkovent Pack Beasts is really emblematic of what this strategy is trying to do. It's an entire army built into one card. A card like Shocking Sharpshooter, if it comes down on turn 2, just absolutely deals so much damage with those creatures entering because of the mobilize mechanic. And then a card like Venerated Stormsinger is just the sort of black card that you want to dip into black for, because when you get to those late game scenarios and you have some mobilize cards, you can attack in. When your creatures die, they ping your opponent for those final few points of damage, and it really just ends the game. And this is the sort of deck that you need as a counterbalance to those late game shenanigans multicolor decks, because if you're filling your earlier turns with just tap lands, the Mardu deck is going to take you down. So you need to be careful to balance your decks to be good in the late game if you're trying to be those late game strategies, but also have some early answers so you don't just get run over by Mardu. So it's a nice little counterweight in the format. Next up is the meta market, discussing the top archetypes and colors. And first up is the archetype rankings. At number 1 is Temur Value. This is the late game multicolor deck that we discussed. Oftentimes, this is a blue-green base that then dips into red for removal spells and powerful late-game cards, but it can also be a blue-red deck that then touches into green for some of the cards. A lot of the time, you are going to splash even a 4th color to get access to powerful things, and in those cases, green does help as a base color because green has some mana fixing available. And this deck just goes to the late game, gets tons of value, and then takes over the game if you have those powerful late-game bombs or really just any really strong cards that you want to splash, things like that. And so this is a really nice strategy. Lots of great card quality in all of the colors, especially the multicolored cards that work between the colors. So like the blue-red multicolored cards, the blue-green multicolored cards, and then the Temur multicolored cards are all really, really strong and really incentivize you to play this strategy. Next up is the Mardu deck that we discussed. Usually a red-white base that touches into black for a couple removal spells, a couple of tricolor cards, things like that. But generally, you're going to be able to go wide thanks to the mobilize mechanic. You're going to put early pressure on your opponent, and you're going to try to end the game before they can take over with their powerful late-game value engines. One thing that's really important for this deck, if you are splashing black, which you often will want to do, is making sure you have some good mana fixing available, because you don't touch into green at all for the green's mana fixing, and so you're going to have to rely on just getting the right fixing from your land base and things like that. Next up is Jeskai, which can be a tempo or control deck depending on where you're going as your base. So if you're going into that red-white base that's just touching into blue for a couple of tricolor cards and maybe a little bit of bounce or something like that, then you're going to be more of a tempo deck, using your red-white aggro to beat your opponents before they can get to that late game value stage of the game. If you're more of a blue-red base, which is definitely a place you can be, then you're playing more of a control strategy using blue counter magic and card draw to pull ahead on cards, answer your opponent's threats, and things like that. And so the Jeskai archetype kind of has multiple directions it can go, and you want to be sure that you're drafting a focused deck when you are playing this color combination, because you don't want to get caught in the middle where you're not fast enough to beat the slow decks, but not good enough value to be able to even take over once you're playing against the aggro decks. So you need to not get caught in that awkward middle ground. You want to make sure that you kind of know where you're going to be with your Jeskai decks, but it is a powerful archetype. Next is the Sultai graveyard decks. These can be really powerful and very similar to the teamer decks that are at the top of the totem pole. But the reason it comes a little bit lower on the standings is because the black-green base is a little bit weaker. So if you're playing a black-green deck that touches into blue, it's not going to be as good. But if you're playing a blue-green deck that just has a couple of black cards and then maybe splashes around, it plays out very similarly to the teamer decks. So keep that in mind. The blue-green base is really, really strong. The black base is a little bit weaker just because black has lower individual card quality and a little bit less power level. So you'll want to keep that in mind. But there's a lot of graveyard value in this set. There's lots of ways to take advantage of getting a full graveyard, and the Sultai deck does really well at that and is also a great home for splashing. And then finally, in last place is the Abzan deck. It doesn't really have as much power level. The counters strategy is going to be powerful sometimes, but it's just easy to disrupt with removal, and the payoffs aren't always really there to keep the cards flowing and things like that. The black-green base is a little bit weaker. The white-black base, if you're trying to play that sort of deck, is also a little bit weaker. The token strategy just doesn't really come together as much as you would like. And overall, you're just not going to be as happy when you're in this deck unless you start off with a really powerful tricolor rare that really pushes you into this deck. It's generally one that you'll avoid unless you're still really wide open, and you can tell that it's wide open by getting past like really strong cards late, because this is the sort of deck that is going to be drafted by someone, but you want to make sure that you're not fighting over it with somebody because it is a little bit weaker. Next is the color rankings. At number 1 is blue. Blue has great card advantage. It has great interaction thanks to counter magic, which is essential in this format because counter magic can stop the late game bombs before they even get resolved. And so that can stop a lot of threats that would normally stop you. And it just fits really well into these late game value decks, because if you're playing a value versus value battle, having access to more card draw and more counter magic is going to be essential. And that's what makes blue really good in this set as a part of those teamer decks, and then even as a splash into the Jeskai decks. Next is green. Green has great fixing in this set. This blue-green base is really great for the teamer strategies. It definitely makes you want to play these late game decks that can splash a lot of colors, fill the graveyard sometimes for those synergies, and do all those sorts of things. There's a lot of powerful cards in green. Next is red. Red is a really good color in this set, but usually it's a little bit harder to start in red because the red cards tend to fit either in these late game shells or in these aggressive shells. So some of the 2-drops that you'll have access to are like really good 2-drops for the aggressive strategy, and then cards that you won't even play in your teamer decks. And so that's why red is kind of in this middle ground. Starting with strong red removal spells in your draft, though, is a good place to be. Because if you start with a really good premium red removal spell, then you can put that either into your late game control deck or into your aggressive deck, and you'll be really happy with that. And so just keep that in mind, that when you're drafting red and starting off with red, you want to have a direction that you're going, because it can be really good either as an aggressive color or as a more defensive color. But you just need to know which direction you're going to go with it. Next is white. White does have some really good aggressive tools. It just doesn't really pair as well with the late game strategies. So like red-white is a top tier color combination, but if you're just starting off with white, it's very limited in where it can go, because as we already established, you're not really trying to play a white-black deck, or you're not really trying to go into Abzan all that much. And so unless you're playing these red-white decks, the white cards don't really contribute as much to your game plan, and that's why it's a little bit lower. And then black coming in at last, it has some really good removal spells, but it just doesn't have the same raw power level, the card advantage that other colors gain access to. And so it's usually a supplemental color where you're base into 2 other colors, and then you're trying to use the black cards as supplemental removal, using the tricolor cards you gain access to in black, things like that. But starting off with like all black cards just doesn't happen as often because the black cards are individually a little bit weaker. So if this is a close pick, this is where you can bias with your color rankings. Next is the format speed. As you see, this is kind of like right in the middle, but I would generally consider this to be a slower format. There are lots of late game battles that are happening where both players are playing these late game decks, and it just comes down to deploying your threats, making sure you play around counter magic or removal spells, making sure you get that card advantage deployed in a timely fashion. And those slow bouts can take really a long time and be really intricate gameplay. However, because there is this Mardu aggro deck and the red-white strategy is a top-tier archetype in the format, you also need to be careful of those. And so that does speed the format up a great deal. If that archetype was not present, this would be a very slow format. But as it is, it's pretty close to the middle, just a tad on the slower side, because you do have to have those early game answers. And so oftentimes there's a little bit of tension between including cards that are going to help you in the aggro matchup and then going up against a slower matchup and realizing that you'll have to sideboard those cards out, put in your more grindy late game cards versus playing the more aggressive strategies where you're just trying to end the game as fast as possible and take over before your opponent can get those late game engines online. And so because of this like push and pull in the format, it does speed up the format a little bit, but still it's a slow format. There's a lot of tap lands, lots of players playing multiple colors, and there is time to deploy your game plan in a lot of cases. Next on my sleeper picks, Nicolai's sleepers. Moving on to the first one, Mardu Devotee. This card is one of the best white commons in the set. It comes down early, does exactly what you're trying to do, fixes your colors, sets up your draws, makes sure that you can deploy your threats in a timely fashion, and is really exactly what these Mardu aggro decks are trying to do. These red-white base decks that are splashing into black helps you splash, which is really especially essential as we already discussed because you're not a green deck, so you lack some of that fixing, and this card is perfect. It plays really well, as you might imagine, with tricolor cards like Sonic Shrieker, giving you an extra source of black mana to help deploy that card in your red-white base deck, and that's a really key thing to be aware of. It also plays great with Salt Road Pack Beast, which is another premium white common, by giving you a great one-drop to play that's going to sit in play and reduce the cost of your Salt Road Pack Beast. And if the 1/2 doesn't really do as much as you might like, the fact that it helps you deploy an early Pack Beast really does help account for the fact that a 1/2 might not be the greatest body in play. Early pressure, mana fixing, setting up your draws, synergizing with the color combination, Mardu Devotee does it all and is actually worth a very high pick as a result, despite looking a little innocuous. Next is Dispelling Exhale. This card is incredibly underrated, but incredibly powerful. As we already discussed, it's raining bombs. There's tons of powerful late game things to do, and if your opponent is casting a 7-drop, your counterspell that counters unless they pay 2 mana is going to stop them well into the game from deploying those powerful spells. And if you have dragons, then it's going to counter those spells in almost all cases, because counter unless they pay 4 is a significant amount of mana. It synergizes great with Durgar Island Dragon, which is the blue common dragon that's going to let you turn this into a counter unless they pay 4. It also is an instant speed effect where if you don't need to counter their spell, you can also just cast the 2-mana skimming strike mode of the Durgar Island Dragon, the Omen, and then shuffle that Island Dragon back into your deck, tap one of their creatures, draw a card, and so you'll be able to spend your mana even if you aren't using the Dispelling Exhale. It also plays well with anything else that's at instant speed. So a Sun Pearl Kirin, for example, a Flash Flyer. So a 2-mana instant, so you can hold up 2 mana on turn 2 and either play the Dispelling Exhale or the Sun Pearl Kirin, or really any other 2-mana play at instant speed. Dispelling Exhale loves being played alongside other instants, so that even if your opponent doesn't cast something worth countering, you can still be using your mana to advance your game plan. I've got a lot of this information summarized on this cheat sheet of sorts, the archetype ranks, the top commons to consider. As you can see, Mardu Devotee and Dispelling Exhale really, really strong. The color rankings and the format speed. You can find this sheet on the NicolaiBolas Patreon. It's free. You don't need to be a patron to access it. It's just a free PDF that you can download over there if you are interested. That is going to do it for this video, though. Thank you so much for watching. Best of luck in your future drafts. If you did enjoy the video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe for more, comment with your questions, thoughts, and feedback, and leave hashtag DragonMaster in the comment section down below to let me know you made it all the way to the end of the video. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.